Okay, so we talked about our grays and how we can use them for shading. I'll just set these off on the side. Hopefully we'll be able to use them in our tutorial. And here is a marker that I have the most questions about, and I find a lot of people have the questions about, which is the colorless blender. What the hell is it? Most people who try to use it like me have no idea what to use it for. And even online, trying to do all my research, I do a lot of research. It's really hard to find out anything about this marker and how to use it properly. Most of the time when you use it, it actually does a horrible job. What it's supposed to do is pick up colors and make things easier to blend. But what I noticed is it just makes the color that you're trying to blend more mute. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so let's try with red, for example. Okay, you notice I colored in streaks. If you color in circular motions, you won't see as many streaks, but the reason why I work with streaks is because pretty much anything I do with a marker, it's just for me, and it's not like a work I'm giving to someone, so I do it for speed and just to test how a color would look. It's just a sketch, so I don't really care about streak marks, but if you want to create a more solid, indistinguishable surface, I guess if you color in circles, you'll get rid of that streak and you won't see it as much, which might be more beneficial for those of you who are doing a piece, for the sake of doing a piece. But yeah, as you can tell, it's a lot more even right here. It's a little darker, but this wastes less ink for me, so I just do it really quick. So here, let me talk about the colorless blender. Alright, so if you look at this, it doesn't really look like it's doing much, but yeah, you could see it probably best. Okay, so here, it was clear before, and then now I have some on here. You want to get rid of that as soon as possible, so on your scratch piece of paper, just get rid of that as best as you can. It should rub right off. So if you zoom in on here, you can see that it actually pulled away color. You can actually see a line defining between the red that I colored before and then how the colorless blender ripped it off. And if you look at the edges, you can see that they started to blur and it started to bleed. So you might be like, well, what the hell is that good for? It's just made my work messy and it made my line messy. That's a good question, and my answer to you is that's exactly why I don't use the colorless blender that often. Another technique I've heard that works is, let's say you wanted to blend another color into there. So I'm going to find orange. Now, I don't use this technique personally, so I'm not going to say to use it, but I heard this works where you can actually just paint the color you want to blend onto the colorless blender, and you can actually use that to kind of help you blend into it. Now obviously that's not doing much right there, and I agree with you, that's not a very effective way to blend. So let me show you how I blend, okay? So normally, you got the red laid down, right? But I wouldn't start with the red, I would start with the orange. So one of my favorite blends is the red to orange, and I'm going to do this on the marker paper to show you a little bit better technique. Okay, so I have my orange, and I have this orange square, and I want to paint another red square right here to kind of symbolize where I want the two colors to meet, I guess. Now my red's kind of fading right now, So just keep that in mind because I used it a lot, but I'm just going to try to show you as best as I can. Now keep in mind I'm not the best at this, but you know, I'm just showing you what I know and how I do it. So bear in mind. Okay, so what I normally do, if I do use a colorless blender at all, I just use it for the joining parts. So I have this square and this square, so I want to create a midsection that you know, they could join at. So what I do is I soak the areas in between. So I have a sort of a square in between with a colorless blender. And what that does, for me at least, is it picks up a little bit of the color from both sides and it allows a little bit better transition. And just keep in mind that every single you can't blend every single color, you know, so you can't get like a purple to blend into an orange, let's say, perfectly. You can get it to work somehow, somewhat, but not 100%. So I chose red and orange because I feel like that could probably work the best. But let's say I found like a orange red, you know, you could use that to help blend it in. Alright, so now that I got the area kind of soaked with the colorless blender, I'm going to go over the whole thing now with orange. So I'm going to start from the top again. And especially emphasize the area that I want to be blended, of course. So if you look at this area, you can still see a little bit of the kind of like the meeting point, and you want to kind of get rid of that. So again, you go back with the colorless blender and kind of just feel your way out around that area. So it's going to pick up a little bit more of that area. And you go back and color it in. Okay, so if you take a look at that section, I got kind of like a gradient going, and you can always adjust that. I will upload every single page I draw on for any of my tutorials, I guess, and put it into a PDF format. And I guess I'll just put it up for download when I'm done with the whole series. But yeah, hopefully the camera can capture some of that. So we got a red on this side and an orange on this side, and I know it's probably a little hard to capture right here, but you guys will be able to see it more in depth when I scan it. So that's how I actually blend colors when I do it. Of course, it's a lot easier with spray paint. And you know, with spray paint, I usually start with the darker color first. So if I want to blend, let's say, light blue on a black, I usually paint the black base coat first, and then I do the light blue. Just because it's easier for me to get the lighter color highlighting the black than vice versa. So yeah, I hope that helps you guys blend a little better, and you got a little insight from that. So like I said, you can use the colorless blender, but this will work exactly the same even if you don't use the colorless blender, except you'll just be coloring more back and forth with this. And if you give more time to dry, you can achieve better results, but I like to work when it's still wet. That way you can keep going and finish your work faster or whatever. Okay, so I went over my materials, I went a little bit into the blending and all that stuff. Alright, so what I'm going to do is get into letter structure. what most people ask me is how do I make my letters better? And that's really hard to answer because first and foremost, I'm not a master of graffiti. I'm not a king or whatever you want to call it. So it's really hard for me to just sit there and say, oh, okay, this is how you want to draw your letters. There are a few DVDs out there that kind of point you in the right direction, but, you know, it's not really going to teach you how to be a graffiti writer. It'll teach you how to write like the person who put out the DVD. And if there's a similar style you want to emulate or bite or whatever you want to call it, that might help you. But if you want to be an original artist, you really have to sit there and think about what the best style is for you. For example, there's a DVD called Graffiti Verite or something like that. And that had a guy named Sane, I believe his name was, and he chose to illustrate his techniques and his painting and all that stuff, which was really awesome. And he talked about how he draws in his black book and he uses his black book to go paint pieces. And this is when I was first learning, so I did pretty much everything he said to. And he did a lot of subway style graffiti, you know, I would say like really big blocky letters, kind of like that, you know, where, let me see. Okay, so he did like really big blocky letters like that, which is cool and everything, but to me, if you put this kind of lettering on a canvas versus like a sticker or a subway car, I would think it's whack. Why? And you guys might not agree with me or whatever, this is just my opinion. Why? Because you're not using your material or your medium or your surface to the maximum extent. For example, if this was a subway car, your outline would pretty much be like that of where you have to draw. So your letters are going top to bottom and wide proportionally to make it flow right and to make it look right. So that would look cool, I think, because you would have a lot of surface to fill inside the lettering so you can get crazy with the fill and still keep it legible while this is moving on train tracks or whatever. If it's on a sticker, same thing. You want to color and fill in the sticker because it looks cooler that way when you color it edge to edge. And I think, you know, that's a really smart way about going with that piece that you're trying to finish on there. However, if you're working on a whole sheet of paper and you put just this there, you have all this space that you didn't use and yet you constricted the letters to that. I don't really like that. I like letters flaring off the page or whatnot. So that's kind of my take on letter structure, and you know that DVD didn't always work out for me. Another thing is people who take their black book to go sketch with them. I used to be one of them, and I would say it's good to some extent and to some extent not really, because for example, let's say I had this piece. To me, on a sketchbook, it looked really clean and it looked super simple, felt like I can do it. But when you go up to a wall, something that has this many straight edges, and especially where the proportions of it is growing depending on, you know, how big your wall is, or let's say your wall is actually smaller in proportion, then you have to make the piece smaller, it might look whack. Because let's say the wall was only this big. Now your piece is going to be so small that it's not really going to stick out. So you don't really have a way of, you know, translating this image to work right there, unless you want to go over someone else's piece. That's totally up to you. So after having a few failures like that and just painting the piece anyways and just doing that, I realized that's not my style. I don't really go to a wall with an outline anymore. Again, I guess the video's ending, so I'll catch you and I'll continue my thoughts on the next one.